Welcome to the On-Premise IT Roundtable podcast, the only show that dares to be both on topic and usually on location. Each time we meet, we bring together a group of IT luminaries to discuss a single concept. In this episode, we're taking another look at the cloud. Is it finally ready for the enterprise? But before we begin, let's meet who's on the panel today. Jim?
Hey, Stephen. Thanks for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Jim Jones. I am a cloud architect for Island Secure Cloud, and happy to be here. Happy to be able to be joining you guys here very soon at Cloud Field Day in San Jose here in a couple of weeks. You can find me online at kool-aid.info. It's probably the best place to go from there.
Hi, Stephen. Thanks for having me. My name is Nico Stein. I'm an AVP of IT at a Signal Financial Federal Credit Union out of the DC region. I'm excited to talk about the cloud. I'm also a delegate for the upcoming Cloud Field Day. Very excited about this. You can connect with me at Twitter at Nico A. Stein or on my blog at nicostein.com.
As you guys mentioned, we're going to be at the Cloud Field Day event actually next week, in November 3rd through 5th, where we're meeting with a bunch of different companies who are talking about cloud in the enterprise. And when we were looking at this list of companies, once again, the core question comes to mind, which is the cloud finally ready for the enterprise? This is not a moot point. This is one of those things where we've been looking at it for a long time. In fact, for a long time, we didn't have a Cloud Field Day event because, quite frankly, the cloud was irrelevant to traditional enterprise IT. It was certainly relevant and taking over everywhere with startups and hyperscalers and new companies and small companies and everything. But, the enterprise was pretty resistant to it. And even now in 2021, when we look at it, there's actually not as much cloud penetration, real cloud, as you might think, especially considering that enterprises have what they call hybrid cloud as a pretend scapegoat to be able to say, oh yeah, we're not cloud, but we're hybrid cloud, which kind of means nothing. So my question for you guys to kick this thing off, what do you think? What's your take? Let's start with Nico. Is the cloud ready for the enterprise?
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, I actually think it's ready. What I've seen in the market in the past 24 months, and it might be driven by COVID, which is a game changer for many, I've seen a certain maturity in the market. In my personal take was, for a long time, it was something that was cool to do, but the business need really wasn't there, or it wasn't taken into account. Just because you can do it doesn't necessarily mean you should do it, right? And now when we're talking about what are the costs, does it actually make sense for a business to move in the cloud other than to say we do it? And the maturity I see where enterprises are looking at it, the cloud makes sense for this, maybe not for all of our applications, but we can save money or we can increase our availability. There's a certain maturity level we've reached, I believe.
Yeah, I do agree with you, Nico. I think that, I think it's definitely still an on-ramp, and I completely agree about COVID and the things that have spawned from COVID really being a driver here. So we've seen a lot of workforces go, remote only, and now that horse is out of the barn, it's in a lot of ways it's going to stay that way. I don't know that by and large, if we look at our bigger employers especially, that we're going to go back to a world where even, there's ever going to be a day where you say you have to be in the office every day. It's going to be either a hybrid model, or it's going to be all remote workforce, or these people work from here, these people can work wherever, which some variants on those. I will add, I think also one of the other drivers, I would think, for enterprises like yours, Nico, as we look towards, can we make the cloud work for what we need and for our growth, is, right now we're experiencing, I won't say unheard of supply chain interruptions, but significant supply chain interruptions, with the big boys really kind of gobbling up all the microchips or the processors and things like that we're dealing with, and lead times on things like servers being so long. With that kind of thing, it's, if you're looking at months, or you're looking at the cost of server X now being 3 times more, does the cost of, the development cycles to make that application more cloud efficient, or just straight up doing a lift and shift, does that become a more viable conversation for someone in the end customer world like you?
So that's a good point, Jim. As a matter of fact, the true life story, what we're dealing with, we have to replace some networking gear. And all my vendors told me already, we're looking at 100 days out. Now, for us, it works because it's a long planned project, but certainly if I was in a pinch right now and I need to expand quickly, it would be really hard to accomplish this. And I know talking cloud and we grow, at the end, it's a bunch of servers and a bunch of network cables put together. And if I don't have any of this, it will not work for us or for anyone that matter. So yeah, the COVID and all its consequences are definitely driving this industry forward in terms of we need to do it now. And a lot of companies who were suspicious of the cloud was like really didn't understand it, or you have the discussions, why are we going to the cloud? Isn't the data much safer in our local data center or local exchange server? To which I always responded, I appreciate the faith you put in me that I can maintain exchange server better than a fleet of Microsoft engineers. But those discussions, to my knowledge, don't happen anymore. We passed this. It's accepted to Office 365. It has penetrated pretty much every little market and big market there is. I know in our industry from 3 organizations who do not use 365, and there are valid reasons. But everyone else there's not the question anymore, should we do it? 365 is standard right now. And I think as we progress, it's going to be more and more standard, that the question is not even, okay, I need to bring up an SQL server. Nico, can you spec a server? It's just like, log into your dashboard, spin up the instance, calculate the money and the cost first. That we probably talk about this later, because that is one of the biggest hindrances, in my opinion, especially for enterprises starting with the cloud, the cost factor and possibly surprises. But I don't think no one will really spin up much local instances for this, where it's really easier to run into the cloud, especially if you cannot get a server.
Yeah, it's interesting that the conversation for the first time ever, I think, started with sort of the drivers and the business drivers and the reasons, instead of starting with sort of the basic questions of, can we even run stuff there? I think maybe we've gotten to the point, and maybe we can talk about that here in a few minutes, that the infrastructure and the platforms are finally ready, at least in some cases. But we were waiting for the drivers, and the drivers certainly, as you mentioned, there are a few things related to the pandemic and work from anywhere, the chip shortage. But Nico, I'd like to kind of zoom in on what you were just saying, because for me, that's actually a key aspect as well. This was an argument that I used to make years ago, that some applications just belong in the cloud. Why are you keeping things like email and collaboration? Why would you hide those behind a firewall in a data center? I mean, they're supposed to be in the cloud because that's kind of closer to the users. It's closer to where the users are. I mean, I can sure understand somebody saying, well, our industrial, control software or our financial accounting software or something should be in the data center. Okay, if that's where the accountants are, why not? But something like collaboration, it doesn't even make sense to put it behind the firewall. Then you have to punch a bunch of holes and you have to deal with access control and all that. I mean, cloud just makes more sense, right?
Absolutely. And again, I think it's discussions you don't have on a technical level. It's more the fear we always used to do it this way, right? And until it's challenged, it really doesn't change. So 365, and I can speak from our implementation, there were definitely some discussions, and IT had to kind of push a bit. No, we really should be doing this, and this is why. One of the reasons is not necessarily to save costs, because when it's all said and done, you're probably not going to save money from on-premise 365 Exchange servers versus cloud, but you gain so much more. And one of the business drivers is, right, it's a tool. So wouldn't IT be better? Couldn't you utilize IT in a better way, for example, data mining and opening new possibilities, than having an Exchange admin patching Exchange server at night, right? It frees up resources that actually help the business, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that, Nico. The exception that I've heard a few times, that let me start with, I don't necessarily agree with it, is that you have to take care of the governance and you have to take care of the security. I hear that more often than not. Reality, both when we talk about things like Office 365, but even things like When we talk about, moving things to the cloud, and let's define cloud, it's anything really. I mean, it could be Amazon. I mean, not the hat tip, but it could be island, it could be things like that. There's a wealth and breadth of knowledge and capability in all of those situations that, especially customers that are in the SMB space, or even in the medium of the SMB space, trending larger, that they're not going to have access to those kinds of skill sets, particularly easily, or it's going to be, that guy, it's going to be one guy that knows it. So definitely cloud solves a lot of those problems for enterprise. The question, or some of the question, also becomes, how are we going to make all those links happen? How's that portability going to happen? Nico, and Stephen, correct me if I'm wrong, but by and large, these companies that are looking at this, it's going to be a workload by workload decision that's going to be made. Are we going to move this thing to the cloud? And if we're not moving everything, well, we've got to make all those things talk together in a reasonable way. And that's a challenge that I think, to the premise that the cloud is finally ready for the enterprise. Yeah, I mean, we're starting to see some really very real tools and capabilities that's making that connectivity, making that portability reasonable. What do you guys think?
Yeah, very good points, Jim. Especially me, I'm coming out of an SMB. One of the challenges is definitely securing it, and I can totally relate to this. There's one guy, a good friend of mine might have coined a hyperconverged administrator at one point when he had a different position than now. But this is definitely a challenge. And in terms of workload, it's almost when you look at all the workloads you have and you take inventory and you see, oh my God, we have 90 servers, we're so small, and we have like 200 different applications. It seems impossible to even start. And that's definitely something I can relate to. But I think in the near future, there really is going to be not many businesses that will be completely cloud, where they completely can shut down their own data center. It might be because they don't have the resources to move it all, or they go the other way. They just go with an MSP and they deal with it. That's the only alternative. But if you want to be in control to some extent to yourself, you have to do it workload by workload. And a lot of the core applications for a lot of businesses outside financial for sure, but others, it is a real struggle to even attempt to move an application to the cloud. And again, the business is the driver, right? If I can come up with the greatest cloud plan, but if like, does this application work in the cloud? No. Well, this is how we make money. This is the most important stuff. I don't care about your SQL server. It's all tools for the business. And that is, I think we're going to get this the way this conversation is going, and talking about vendors. So yes, the cloud is ready for the enterprise, but then the question is, are all the vendors ready for the cloud?
Well, and so I'll give a little. So something you just said, the whole, are we going to move everything to an MSP, or are we going to move everything to here? I will say that a lot of the conversations that I have day in and day out are around the fact that nobody wants to be all in on any of those things these days. We want, so you're going to have some things on-prem, some things, that crazy financial management application that, requires, a field full of racks just to do the compute and or excuse me, to do the storage and things like that. But there's going to be certain workloads that you're going to find, either because of efficiency or speed to be able to roll out. It might be a case you're going to need 4 virtualization hosts to be able to support this application. You can look at an MSP and you can get that in a week, or and spun up and going, or you can try to do this on your own and be lead times. Doesn't have to be that all the applications have to be quote unquote cloud native ready to do those kinds of things. There's a large number of companies, some of which I'm greatly familiar with, that are happy to give you that same vSphere experience that you're used to allow those things to happen. But like I said, it all comes down to, you have to have the want and desire as an organization. You also have to have the ability to make that as seamless as possible, so that it's not, oh, here's where we are. And while we're at it, you also have to think about things like, how am I protecting those applications? Where's that data going to live? Things like that. they're all solvable questions, but it's different questions than maybe your typical legacy organization has ever had to ask before.
I think that the thing that gets me here is that, again, back to what I said earlier, we're at the point now where basically the cloud is ready. So the enterprise IT and applications community are starting to ask themselves maybe a harder question. Because before, I think it was almost a cop-out. You could say, well, yeah, the cloud is there, but we kind of can't use it because, we kind of can't run this or that or the other in it. And sure, there's still things that can't run in it. Let's make sure that we put a flag in the ground there. There are still some applications that can't be run in any, public cloud environment because they're too tied to hardware or they're too centralized or whatever. But at the same time, many things can be run in the cloud. And so enterprises now have what is probably the harder choice to make, which is, do we? And there are a lot of concerns there. There's security concerns, there's ownership, there's lock-in. Wow, I sound like I'm talking about the data center. Anyway, there's certainly financial concerns as well. Our friend Corey Quinn with his AWS bill examinations and his all the stuff that he does. There's a lot of companies now sprouting up. We're actually going to talk to one of them at Cloud Field Day here as well, who are looking at the cost of going to the cloud. And in many cases, despite what people might think, it's not a slam dunk financially to move to the cloud because there's a lot of cruft that kind of goes with it. So enterprises now have to make the decision of which things do we move to the cloud. And I think that's another thing too. For a long time, enterprises were basically thinking of it as a binary choice. Either we have a data center or we have a cloud, but we don't have both. And now I think people are getting a lot smarter and saying, you know what? No, that's not how it works. We're going to have a data center. We're going to have some hybrid cloud. We're going to have some public cloud. We're going to have some software as a service. And it's going to be a spectrum, and it's going to be decided on a per application, per group, per need basis. Is that right?
So yes, Stephen. So I completely agree with you. And to quote, actually, I hate to say it, but my favorite sticker on earth, there is no cloud. There's just somebody else's computer. One of my pet peeves is we need to stop thinking of the cloud as hyperscaler only. It's not. The cloud does not just exist in the scope of AWS, Azure, GCP, insert massive company as you are. The cloud is also Nico's data center. The cloud is also MSPs. The cloud is also Office 365. These are all parts of what we should, as admins, as CIOs, as people in charge of making the decisions of what goes where. We should be cognizant of that and then make sure that we can leverage all parts of those, the terms, I said cloud, hybrid cloud, et cetera. Let's put all those to bed and let's start making sure that things go where they are, because guess what, guys? The tools are starting to catch up to where the tooling is going to make it to where things can go here, there, and everywhere as we need to.
Yeah, they're good points, Jim. I totally agree. And especially in terms of expenses. One of the arguments or discussions in the past about either cloud or our own data center came down to costs. Right? You would look at the cloud expenses like, well, can we at least shut down our own data center? And some companies probably went this way because they had to justify a cloud endeavor. And as we go on and we learn, we need to use the hybrid approach. I can lower the footprint of my data center, so maybe save some costs there. But the first argument I think when the cloud came up, it's like, oh, we can save so much money. And then and that's still true, and that why tools come about, like, oh my God, I put something in the cloud, I downloaded all my file shares, and now I get this AWS bill, which will be a resume generating event. And that fear is still, especially for the smaller businesses, because they are not so familiar. It's almost like Microsoft licensing. You need a PhD degree to kind of sort of understand it. And I think that cloud providers, the bigger ones at least, maybe they're getting a bit better, having more transparency in this, but I think there is still a lot of improvement. And that's why I hope we're talking about maturity, where tools will help you to estimate, and you don't have that surprise when you go to CFO, look, we brought this workloads in the cloud, it works, but now we're paying so much more. because then the discussion is going to take a pretty upsetting turn.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing on the talk of costs that I'd like to mention is, one challenge that I found often for myself is we have to think about cost not just in terms of the financial right here this year. And, is this workload going to cost the same it's going to cost for me to do it there? Because oftentimes we're comparing apples to oranges. Nico, tell me if this rings true, or Stephen yourself. I'm looking at moving this to the cloud, and if I move it to the cloud, I know it's going to be able to work in an efficient way. It's going to be able to work in a multi-geographical area or capability, versus if I put it in my data center, maybe my hosts are 5 years old. Maybe that storage array that I'm running on is starting to get some legs on it, and we're going to have to be looking for a replacement soon, or we're getting to the point where we're maxing those things out, and we're going to have to be adding more. We're going to have to be growing, things like that. The beauty of cloud, the beauty of public cloud in all of its different variants is you have much greater capability for scale, both within a data center or within a given workload, or the ability to make that thing a global thing, and the global may not be for everybody, but I can say from experience, even the smallest organizations often truly have to care about what's going to happen when this particular application goes haywire. What's going to happen if it, all of a sudden has a big data growth because we have a migration going, things like that. Public cloud makes the cost and the availability of those applications a far better thing.
Yeah, 100%. And I want to add, for us, financial industry, we highly audited. The disaster recovery is always not a source, but it takes a lot of money for consequently hosting some service you hopefully never need to use, right? And this is one of the biggest advantages, I think, in cloud, where it's not even so much about a cost, it takes a pain away. I don't have to worry about it, right? It's the same with networking. If I have in the cloud, we all have HA devices. Some argue HA is more trouble than it's worth. Maybe, maybe not. I think that's outside the scope of this discussion. But the beauty is I don't have to worry about HA, server, hot standby, all of these things, because the cloud is, I give someone money and make it their problem.
One of the ironies here too is that back to 5 years ago, when people were all worried, oh, can I run this? Can I not run this? One of the things that they wanted from it was that sort of as a service or software defined infrastructure approach, where they could have, basically hardware that you could program using APIs, that you could provision automatically, that you had automatic monitoring and management and layout and all this kind of stuff. That was all the purview of public cloud for a long time, and that was kind of the value prop for a lot of the public cloud offerings. But surprise, a lot of that stuff is coming into the enterprise too. And so we're at the point now where enterprises actually have the ability to build their own cloud. Now, they're obviously not going to get the same benefits as a public cloud provider might be, but if what they're looking for is that sort of flexibility and programmability of the infrastructure, that's exactly what a lot of these companies are doing. In fact, a lot of them are actually taking the technology from the public cloud and applying it to the enterprise in a smart way. So, we talked with Red Hat about OpenShift last time, for example. The networking companies are doing this. The storage companies are doing this. I mean, there's so much more true software-defined storage, API driven, highly scalable storage systems now. There's so many networking companies now that are creating basically a networking abstraction layer that allows you to do everything dynamically. And it's gotten to the point where not only can you do the things the public cloud can do, but you don't even need the public cloud to do them. And for example, we just heard, with AWS and with Azure, and now even with Google, you'll be able to deploy, your own instance of the public cloud in your own data center. Nico, how are enterprises like financials and stuff, how are they reacting to the availability of technology like that?
That's an interesting point. And when Amazon first announced Outpost, I think that was a few years ago, right? You saw like, oh, wow, now first enterprises looked, we're going to the cloud, and darn, the cloud is in my data center all of a sudden. But I think this is where we're really going to head towards, to where the data centers become more similar, where really it's only the location is the only determining difference between the public cloud and my own data center. In terms of high availability, it's almost easy to calculate, right? For financial industry, we can easily calculate how much money do we make per minute in transactions. So if I don't have that service, this is exactly how much money I lose per minute. Not having to worry about this. And that doesn't mean, by no means am I stating that the public cloud never goes down. They have their own slew of outages. It is always DNS, and I will die on that hill, but there's definitely outages. The beauty is, in my opinion, it's more likely they can solve that outage quicker than you can in your own data center. Now, if you're a huge player in the financial industry or any industry, you're almost very similar to a big cloud player. You have your data centers on the West, East Coast, so you're using the same principles as a cloud provider. The high availability and the disaster recovery are one of the greatest factor about cloud, I believe.
Yeah, and and so Nico, as you know, because we've talked about this many times, I've at a previous employer worked in a similar industry that you did, and I will say, one of the things that I guess the traditional application vendors that I used to see there was they were starting to make their application cloud, but by making it cloud, they were saying that's fine, but you're going to run it inside of our cloud. This is going to, it's less that it's going to be you can take the application that you're now running on site and making it a now cloud native application, as much as we're going to now make this a managed application for you that's running in our cloud. Have you seen anything like that?
Yeah, I definitely see the shift. So some of the bigger financial core providers are cloud-based. They're coded for the cloud. They have APIs, which is a great advancement already from traditional approach, right? Where it's completely walled off. But it does not run in the public cloud. It runs in their own private cloud, which to some extent is definitely improvement in my world. The question is then, would I even benefit if they were in a public cloud? Because we're talking a bit about vendor lock, right? You can always get out of a vendor if you put in your contract work, right? It's how much it's going to cost and all that, but it's not that easy. The question I would almost ask back is, does it need to be in the public cloud? Because in the financial world, again, you don't change your financial core provider that often. It is a huge undertaking. It takes years. Even if you don't like the one you're currently on, or if the other one is much better and you want to switch, there's a whole bunch of work, planning, year-long projects. So you're not doing this lightly. So the one of the benefits of a public cloud, right? Well, now it's cheaper in AWS. Now I'm moving it over to Oracle Cloud. With those applications, I don't know. Question back to Jim and Stephen. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so we get into again, is the enterprise ready for cloud, or excuse me, is the cloud ready for enterprise? And the answer is that I think definitely yes. But again, we come back to we need to change our definition of cloud. Cloud is all these places that we're running it. Public cloud definitely is ready for the vast majority of our workloads, but the workloads need to be changed still somewhat. We also as enterprises have to change our mindset as to how we're going to think about those applications and what is important to us as we look to leverage more things in a bigger scale. We need, to your point that you talked about, Nico, one of the biggest things being the disaster recovery capability. We know how this application worked. We knew what our SLAs were for this application and this when it ran on-prem. Do those things still hold true when we move to the cloud? We have the capability to, in those situations, we can vastly ramp up the availability of those things. So instead of looking at, it might take an hour or two if this application were to crash when we had it on-prem. If I do that in the cloud, and it in theory can take minutes, but let's say AWS is having an outage. Have we moved the needle for the enterprises themselves as we do that to where the expectation becomes this is how it should be, and then we change the policy underneath of it?
Yeah, DR is one of those things that's really important in my mind. Well, number one, because that was like my whole career. I was one of the people out there that was trying to make DR work in the days before virtualization, let alone the cloud. And DR, frankly, the next step in my career was making DR work in VMware environments. And that was honestly the biggest thing that VMware brought to the table, the biggest thing that VMware brought to the enterprise. It wasn't any of the things people say, it was DR. It was the fact that you could actually get up and running somewhere else on different hardware, not just pretend to. Because it used to be, you were basically out of luck. I mean, we all us IT guys kind of knew the scoop, which was that it never would run, no matter what you did. And then with VMware, suddenly it could run. And that was worth the price of admission. And it was the worst of price of virtualizing everything. For me, that's what I'm seeing with cloud as well, because there are a lot of these applications out there. I mean, we're going to be talking to Veeam here at Cloud Field Day, but there's a lot of companies out there that are doing this, where they're replicating data on premises to public cloud, and they're able to use the public cloud infrastructure much like they used VMware infrastructure 10 years ago as a DR target. They're able to make sure that things get up and running. And right there, you might have a killer app, just like it was for virtualization. It might be a killer app for the cloud. What do you guys think, Nico?
Yeah, 100%. I know we talked about DR a lot, but it is a driving factor. I commend you that that was one of your previous jobs, careers. I don't know anyone who really enjoys working on the DR problem. Everyone's like, if it just could go away and I never had to worry about it, right? Just give me a button, give me an automation. I run my test, it works, but I don't want to design it, architect it. It is definitely something that drives me personally and professionally to go more cloud, so I don't have to worry about it. I do like backups, but I do not like designing DR solutions. For me, it's not particularly fun. And you're right, and you never know if it works. And there are certain things that I already know in our disaster recovery plan. Well, that is probably not going to work. I don't see how this could work. Not having to worry about it, right? Using our resources and at the enterprise in a different, more efficient way. Let people, well, in this case with the cloud, we don't even have to worry about other people dealing with it so much because it just scales up so much easier. They take care of it, it is done. So completely 100% agree that DR is maybe a bigger factor for cloud native or cloud applications than first it's anticipated, right? A lot of people still think I'm moving to the cloud, I'm saving money. And I highly caution against that. If that's your driving factor, you might be in for a bad surprise.
Yeah, and because people like you, don't necessarily like to design for disaster recovery scenarios, people like me that do exist. And to your question, Stephen, is disaster recovery the killer app for the public cloud? As someone who works for one of the biggest players in being that location and being those subject matter experts for that exact use, absolutely, we've got thousands of pretty happy customers that would agree with that. It can be backup, it could be replication, it can be we need to move the workload. The thing of it is as we think about disaster recovery, it's doing what works good for you. What I ultimately got me into doing this kind of things is, Nico, when I was in your similar situation, I hated having to deal with a cold site. I hated having to deal with that other data center that I was paying for that did nothing and just sat there. And oftentimes, all the time, what made up that, even in virtualization times, that data center was the hardware we got rid of. It was the hosts that weren't keeping up with the workloads and we replaced, so we shifted them to the DR site. And I had them there. I knew I could never run everything. And so as you started to see things like, Veeam's Cloud Connect network or public cloud and things like that, where I had this place where I didn't have to pay for that when I'm not using it. When you talk about, cost and savings when it comes to public cloud at all, really that's what we get down to, is we don't want to pay for these things when we're not using them. And that's where your cost is really going to come into.
So just to wrap up, I guess, back to the premise, the cloud is finally ready for the enterprise. I think we are vehemently agreeing with that statement. I don't think I've heard anyone say anything that contradicts that. With, of course, the big asterisk that some applications may not be appropriate for the cloud. Some applications, enterprise may not want to run in the cloud for a variety of reasons. But for the most part, yeah, cloud's ready. Let's do this thing, right? Am I right? I'll give you guys each a minute or so to sum up. Nico, cloud's ready for the enterprise?
Cloud is so ready for the enterprise. Yeah, it's happening as we speak, right? Again, we touched on it. COVID is the primary driver where enterprise really like, let's do it. Cloud providers are like, wow, everyone wants to come to us. We want to provide the service. We're in the business of making money. There's a need for it. Let's fill up that need. We've seen the tools maturing. We talked about this. There's still some great innovation happening of tools. We're going to see some of that at Cloud Field Day in 2 weeks. I'm really looking forward to this. So the cloud is ready for the enterprise, definitely.
Yeah, and I agree. The cloud is ready for the enterprise, as long for varying values of the cloud. There's lots of different definition there. Hyperscaler cloud is great. MSPs are great for other things when we need to get them out of our data center, but we still need them to work the same way. And on-prem cloud also works, as long as we make sure that we can get them all talking to each other. And that's really where, some of the stuff that I'm most excited about with Cloud Field Day coming up is some of these vendors that we're going to be talking to that are here just to make that a more seamless conversation.
Yeah, so Prosimo, Juniper, companies like that, yeah. Well, I think that, we're going to officially change the relationship status of enterprise and cloud to it's complicated, but also we're going to check the box that says in a relationship. I think that works.
Yeah.
So thank you guys very much for this discussion. Looking forward to our discussion again. Please join us for Cloud Field Day, November 3rd through 5th. If you miss that, or if that doesn't work into your schedule, if you're on the other side of the planet or something, don't worry. All the videos get posted to YouTube/Tech Field Day, and you can watch them there too. So if you want to see how it comes out, please do. In the meantime, Jim, where can we connect with you and follow your thoughts on cloud?
Oh, there's a few thoughts. So probably for the stream is Twitter for the most part, where I'm Kool-Aid IT with zeros. It's a popular name. I'm not that Jim Jones, but somewhat related. And then for the longer thoughts, check out koolaid.info, which is my blog. Here, especially lately, there's been quite a bit of Veeam related content. So, and I plan on quite a bit for Cloud Field Day.
Very good. And you can easily connect with me as well as on Twitter at Nico A. Stein. I'll be sharing my thoughts on Cloud Field Day there. Also, for some more in-depth blog posts, check out nicostine.com. And you can also connect to me on LinkedIn at Nico Stein.
Great. And as for me, I'm at Foskett on most social media networks, and you can find my writing at gestaltit.com, as well as more and more on LinkedIn and, of course, on Twitter as well. So thank you for joining us for the On-Premise IT Roundtable. If you enjoyed this discussion, please do subscribe. You can subscribe it as a podcast, an audio podcast, or you can check out the videos on YouTube, and you can find us in most podcast applications. While you're there, maybe give us a rating or review. That does help. And please do share the show with your friends and let us know what you think as well. We would love to hear from you. This podcast is brought to you by gestaltit.com, your home for IT coverage from across the enterprise. For show notes and more episodes, go to gestaltit.com/podcast. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.